Any discussion on the minutes? We have a motion from Representative Johnson, second by Representative Roth. Beat you by a little bit. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion passes. Representative Roth. All right, thanks. Next item is the bill introductions. Are there any bill introduction requests from the committee? I do have one. It's 23 RS 0851. And it expands kind of the work program participation for receiving benefits for able-bodied adults without dependents to other welfare programs in Kansas. Is that an accurate description? The RS 0851. Any comments on that? Questions? All right, we'll accept that. Representative Meyer.
I just was wondering if you could clarify which programs this was for specifically. Thank you.
So currently, the request is more for looking at all public assistance. And right now, we are fine-tuning the draft to make those specific call-outs on which programs. But right now, we're taking a look at all of them. So, and that's just for able-bodied adults without dependents. And any bill introductions from the audience? Okay, all right, so bill introduction is closed for today. Oh, also on the, so ask Jesse from the revisor's office to do a quick overview of the 2023 session planner with regards to certain deadlines for bill introductions and how that affects our committee. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee. This is Jesse with the revisor's office. The chair has asked me just to provide some dates you might want to put in your calendar. So this is a non-exempt committee, and that means that any bills introduced or sponsored by this committee are subject to the deadlines created in the joint rules. So as many of you probably knew, yesterday was the last day as an individual to request a bill and sponsor a bill. And so the next deadline is going to be the last day for non-exempt committees, such as this committee, to request bill drafts. So between now and Monday, you can put in a request to our office, and up until the 6th, on the 6th, will be the last day for you to go to a committee with an RS number and request that that committee sponsor a bill. And then those bills must be turned in and introduced to the House clerk on the floor that 10th. So the days again are, the request date is February 6th, Monday, and then the day that those bills have to be introduced and assigned a bill number would be February 10th, that Friday.
Thank you, Jesse. So the 6th is a Monday, correct? Okay, so we're not meeting on Monday. So that, if I'm understanding this correctly, leaves this Thursday. So 2 days from now as pretty much the deadline for this committee to request bill introductions into this committee. I probably will not call a special meeting, so that is another option. Probably won't happen. Okay, thanks. All right, good deal. Thank you. So for the presentations today, going to make a small modification. We'll Mark Eltonbert from the Department of Children and Families Fraud Cross-Checking to present first, and then we'll follow up with the gentleman from Equifax. So welcome, Mark. Thank you.
Mic not on? Should I? We're good? Okay. We provided a short testimony in terms of what we do and kind of the nuts and bolts in terms of how we work with Equifax. We contract with a subsidiary of Equifax called Talix. We utilize that service, or our fraud people utilize that service to try to identify social services fraud via workplace verification and income verification. The information with respect the information that we receive through Talix and via Equifax is listed there, employer name, employment status, those sorts of factual items that are, the purpose of that is to identify welfare fraud, to verify employment. And obviously, if something pops up in that sense, then our investigators will independently investigate that potential fraud by taking steps such as administrative subpoenas for bank records, potentially interviewing people, maybe, doing stakeouts, things like that. So in terms of the nuts and bolts of how this system works, I'm not the one to ask. I just, when my fraud people find a potential fraud, they come and let me know, and we talk about the steps to take and how they potentially came to that information. So this does set forth the current contract that we have with Talix. Obviously, also KDHE utilizes Talix for their Medicaid fraud. We currently have an RFP that is just going out. I believe the Secretary advised me this morning that she just signed it for the next contract on this matter. So that'll be, and that's probably one reason why we're having this conversation today, I would imagine. So we've partnered with Equifax for a while, and it started in 2015 when we rolled out Kansas eligibility enforcement system that was medical only. It has since expanded to non-medical services, and including all non-medical programs within DCF as listed, PPS, CSS, EES, and our voc rehab folks. So that's realistically, that's kind of the summary that we've brought to you today. I'm happy to answer any questions or provide any supplementary information that I can collect for you. I think that's where we're at this point.
Thank you, Mark. We'll have plenty of time for questions. So a lot of this is new. So we're not going to rush the questions. We'll just kind of take plenty of time. All right, thanks. Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question for you would be about, so I see here the different amounts that are paid by DCF to Talix. Who pays the other 70-ish%?
That's paid by KDHE.
Okay, all KDHE?
Yeah. So the breakdown there is between DCF and KDHE. They're both part of the same contract.
Okay, so those are the only two agencies that pay into Talix?
That is my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Humphreys.
So my question might be a question to you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm kind of just looking at this. I feel like I might have some more questions for DCF after I hear from Equifax, if you're able to stay, or I'm trying to take it all in for just a minute and sort of see where I might have questions. So is that okay if we?
Absolutely, and I've asked Mark from DCF. We have a Mark from Equifax too, so it's going to get mixed up. So
okay.
he'll be here and certainly open to taking questions even during or after the Equifax
That's
presentation.
my question.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Wagner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I guess I have a question. So you're in charge of all the fraud investigations or all the fraud department for the entire DCF? Am I correct?
We have our chief fraud investigator, and he has a team of investigators, and they investigate everything having to do with welfare fraud at DCF. He reports to me. I'm his supervisor.
If I can. So in a cumulative basis, I mean, I've seen data for like Medicaid fraud in other states, as far as, sort of a percentage of the total package ends up going to either used fraudulently by people latching into the system or people who are, doctors or something who are scamming the system. I mean, do you have basic data as to, for the programs that you administer or that you cover, as to how much of that is going on in like Kansas currently?
I do not have that information, but I can get that information.
Okay. If I can, have they never reported that to the legislature? That's not like readily available information, or it's just something you just didn't happen to bring today?
Representative, I'll be perfectly honest. The information, we weren't exactly sure how this was going to go. We were asked to come here and provide a brief summation of what we do to cross-check work verification. Okay. So that's the preparation that we put in. Obviously, any questions that you or either legislators here may have, we can certainly follow up.
So you've been at your job for a couple years here then with the state of Kansas, I presume. I mean, so what's kind of the most common type of fraud that comes across your desk? I mean, what in just sort of, stream of consciousness, how would you, where is the fraud issues that you currently see?
Probably the majority of what I currently see are in the SNAP program.
I see. Do you have any sort of data? Or I'm probably asking too much data, but do you know do you have any sense as to the scope of it, or any total numbers given?
Realistically, I would say that on a percentage-wise basis, the percentage is rather small. But obviously, when you take a percentage and you extrapolate that out to the population, it can potentially have large numbers. The answer to your question is I don't have that information with me, but we certainly can obtain whatever estimate we have in terms of the fraud that we see.
See. And if I may ask one more, just why would the SNAP program you end up with more kind of fraud issues related to that program versus others?
Well, I can't speak to the motivation of the individuals who are utilizing the SNAP program versus others. I just know that when it gets to me, most of the run-of-the-mill stuff is handled by our investigative unit. It only makes its way to me if it's kind of unique. And probably I don't want to overstate what I've seen, but for example, you'll see times when an individual who has their own business, for example, will utilize the food through SNAP as part of their business. Or, I mean, we've seen situations where you have individuals who are getting the food through SNAP and then selling it. So those are the incidents that come to mind, because I looked at them and I thought, that's rather significant. And sometimes I look at it and I think if these folks would put as much time into just everything else as they do, because some of these schemes are pretty impressive. So without belaboring the point here, I think SNAP is probably what I see the most, and why that is, I probably couldn't tell you.
So also, committee, and this is probably coming pretty soon to your inboxes, some of the research requested during prior meetings. I think, Idaida, you pulled a lot together and have it available to the committee. Gary, has that been emailed out, or is that still? Yeah, so we'll probably see a lot of that later today and walk through a lot of it on Thursday. And some of the fraud numbers are in there from DCF. So sorry for not getting that out prior to the meeting. Representative Carr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just clarification on where you say some of the fraud numbers are probably in there. Is that going to be a roll-up in the total dollar amount that we find as fraudulent activity, or just a percentage based on the number of total accounts?
Thanks, Tyler.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, so there's a couple of different reports that will be coming to your inbox. Largely, it's rolled up by fiscal year and broken down whether it's a criminal administrative hearing or some type of civil hearing that made that determination. It'll tell you the number of investigations, number of claims, how those were handled, and then provide some deep dive background information on some of those fraudulent claims as well.
One more question. So do we also have a comparative as to the number and amount of claims versus the time and tax dollars spent on investigating those claims?
We certainly, I can't tell you what's going to be in that report, but we certainly have information on how much time we spend investigating these issues. We certainly track that. So, I mean, that's information that we could certainly supplement.
Certainly. So could you provide that for us then when you?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hoagland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would it be accurate to say that it's substantially more than this $2 million that's on the paper here? Or do you know?
Oh, the $2 million that's on the paper here is the current contract that we have. Is that I might have missed the question.
So that's basically a drop in the bucket of what you actually spend looking for fraud.
Well, this is what we, yeah, I mean, we have investigators that work and get paid to investigate fraud over and above the contract with Talix. That is correct.
Are we finding more fraud than we are spending finding fraud?
I believe so. I can't guarantee that to you because I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I believe we are, yes.
Will those numbers be in our?
Representative, specifically the numbers, are you requesting similar to Representative Carr that the kind of rounded figures on how much time the department would spend investigating or looking for fraud, or what specifically?
Excuse me. The first week we were here, the first meeting we were here, Dylan was giving us some information as to all the different people that are involved in investigating fraud. And at that time, I asked how much fraud they're finding compared to how much money they're spending to find it. So I don't think we've had an answer from that first meeting.
Mr. Chairman, so there will be specific numbers about how much fraud is, how many dollars are being found and what the judgments are, and that'll be coming to you now. And we can provide you a quick summary of roughly how much per year we're spending on fraud investigations. That number is part of the budget presentations which we're doing right now.
Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would request an additional point of clarification, if that's okay, on this report. What I'm specifically looking for, and I don't expect you to know this off of the top of your head, is so compared to how much we're spending and providing out of our state dollars for this contract, how much of those dollars are actually being recouped. So what that would look like, you know, if we're spending $2.1 million on this contract to investigate and find fraud, how much fraud is actually being found? If that, I think that's
Right.
maybe what a few of my colleagues are trying to get at here. I don't want to speak for them. So I would request that information as well, if that's okay. And to follow up with that, in a previous conversation we had with individuals presenting from the DCF, I had asked what percentage of fraud was actually occurring, and they said that it was nearly negligible. Could you tell me if that would be accurate, and if so, if you have a roundabout percentage of how much fraud is actually being committed?
Well, I never really know what negligible means, and somebody else used the word because I didn't use it. But I can say that the number, the percentage isn't, I mean, it's not that large, okay? What negligible means, what not that large means is relative. I don't have the actual figures. We will certainly be providing them to the extent they're not in the report. But I don't like to use somebody else's words of estimation because negligible to one person is not negligible to somebody else. And the reality is when we're working with real numbers, you get past the percentages, those numbers can be large, even if it's a small percentage.
Representative Humphries?
Okay, I have a few of my thoughts together now. So I guess some of my questions center around, do you have investigators, are we waiting for calls to be called in, or are you reporting some sort of fraud? Or are you proactively out doing things looking for fraud?
Our investigators are actively out investigating fraud. It's not a situation where they're just reactive and they're, kind of sitting around waiting for something to pop up. They are actively looking for it, and utilizing this system is one way in which they do that. But I mean, they spend time on the road. They are out. They do actively look for fraud, I guess you could say.
And how many investigators are there? There's a head, you mentioned the head investigator, and then
Correct.
others under that
We have a head
person.
investigator, and at this point, because I believe we have, I think we have a position description out for one. So right now, I believe we have 3.
3 with 1 plus 1 empty.
Correct.
Okay. And then, so if you find fraud, and I know we don't know the numbers yet, but we'll get it. So is there any recouping that, or are you filing charges against that person? Are you just canceling their benefits, or are you getting anything back? What happens if you do find fraud?
No, those are good questions. There's not a hard and fast. The bigger the fraud is, the more people we get involved. Let's put it that way. I mean, we always try to recoup. When we do every 6-month reviews of people, and so if we find that, we make an effort to recoup where possible. If it's a significant fraud, we bring in local law enforcement. I have personally had conversations with people from the FBI, people from Homeland Security about some very large fraud issues that are going on. We partner with local law enforcement, and so, but how much we do on that scale in terms of seeking charges, things like that, largely depend upon the size of the fraud. But yes, we will. The first step is to terminate the benefits, and then depending upon the amount of fraud that we find, that will guide kind of the next steps in terms of how far we go, so to speak.
Yep. And so that 6-month review, is that where you're finding most of the fraud? Or, I mean, do you have any idea, or is it the hotline, or is it them out doing investigations, or where are you finding most of it?
To be honest, it's all of it. I don't know if I could say that you find more in the 6-month look back. We get a lot from hotline calls. We get a lot from some referrals. I mean, the cases that I've been involved in mainly, there's a large investigation going on in Wichita, for example, where I've spoken to Homeland Security, and our investigators have been doing things there as well. A lot of that gets referred to us, or vice versa, depending upon the size of it. So it's the hotline calls, it's the 6-month look back, it's referrals from other law enforcement agencies, other state agencies, realistically. So all of that kind of goes together. I can't tell you which one garners more. I don't know.
And you had mentioned that the SNAP program was the place where you have the biggest amount of fraud.
Well, that's just based upon my personal experience.
Okay, but I'm curious, isn't there an option for the department to require photo IDs for SNAP? And I'm just curious, and are you using that, or would that cut down on the fraud? SNAP photo IDs.
Well, I can't say whether or not it would cut down on fraud. Intuitively, I think it probably would, but I can't.
But you're not.
It's above my pay grade.
Using that option that's available?
I do. That issue's been out there. Mm-hmm. I've heard about it kind of out of the side of my head. But I don't want to say that we don't use them because I don't know that for absolute certainty. So that's information that I'd like to get for you instead of giving you an answer that
Okay.
is admittedly speculation.
Yeah, that would be interesting too.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, then it's kind of almost towards the end. Like, so, you have the contract with, Equifax subsidiary, Talcs, or however you might say it. And then we pay the investigators. And then it says, in addition, you've got the CLEAR software database that you use, and that has to do with the 3 credit agencies. And then also you have some access to your EBT vendor, FIS. And so I'm assuming that costs something too. So kind of all of those things add up to be the cost of our fraud investigations with these programs?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say that all of those programs that we utilize, plus the cost of our investigators, whether or not you want to, kind of bring the recoupment numbers in there to decrease that, I guess is however you want to look at the spreadsheet. But I would think that's an accurate statement. I can say that the contract that we have with Talix had a not to exceed, and I want to say it was roughly $8 million as a not to exceed. So these are the numbers that we're actually spending. So while it's been, I guess while we've been appropriated more money for that, or however you want to phrase it, we're spending less than that. So I'm not saying we're saving money, but I'm just telling you, we could be spending more. So, but no, it's, I don't want to be flippant, I'm just
I guess maybe
mentioning
the
it.
answer is, but that does make me think if it can go up to that. I mean, they're paid according to the investigations that they do, or how much fraud they find? Because you said it could go up to 8 million. So
Well,
how are they?
And this is probably better asked of Equifax because
Okay.
they're the ones who get paid.
Yes.
And they get paid on a certain basis.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So I can't tell you specifically how they break that down. I can just tell you that, but in preparation for this, I looked at the Talix contract, and then I received information from our budget people, how much we actually spend. And so just comparing those two numbers.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I appreciate that. We'll ask them that. And then I had one last, it has to do with your question, Representative Myers, that negligible amount of fraud. But wasn't that, someone else maybe can remember, didn't that have specifically to do with the, was it the TANF money? Like there was none, I mean, you can't spend your TANF cash assistance on, I don't know if it was cigarettes or liquor, I don't remember what it was exactly. But the question was, if I remember, how much fraud are you finding that to happen? And they said none. And I just remember the thought going through my head, well, you can take money out and then you can go spend it on those things because it's just cash. So then it seemed like there would not be any fraud or fraudulent purchases of those things. But I don't know if you remember your specific question, but it was about something particular, but I've forgotten exactly what it was. So if that's helpful to you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Meyer.
Thank you. I do believe that I was asking a general question about fraud, although I could go back and look at the video and get back to you. I really can't recall at this point. My brain is becoming mush. This is a lot of information and a lot of questions to ask, but I don't believe that was the context. I believe that I was just looking at overall incidents of fraud for all of the programs, I believe, which leads me to my next question. So in the conversations that we had previously where I had asked DCF representatives to speak a little bit about the incidents of fraud, my background is in social work. So I've had quite a bit of experience with helping folks apply for these programs. And in that context, I understand that as a caseworker, as a social worker, as a person helping others apply for these benefits, occasionally there can be a clerical error made on either my part or another caseworker's part, which leads me to my question. I understand that you've spoken a bit about some fairly large cases that I'm unfamiliar with, and I would love to know more about those specifically, because I was not aware that there was the type of fraud that you're inferring is occurring. However, to get to the root of the question, wouldn't the incidence of clerical error or caseworker, mismanagement, or just, not exactly returning certain documents in a timely manner, aren't those more the type of activities that result in getting people dismissed from benefits? Or do you believe that it's actually truly intentional fraudulent activity?
Well, again, I can't speak to people's individual motivations. There are rules in place in an effort to make sure that we're verifying the information that's given to us so that the people who receive the benefits are the people who need the benefits. Are there clerical errors? Certainly. Nobody's perfect, and in any system there's going to be mistakes that are made. Part of the investigative process is to root those out and identify, okay, which ones of these are clerical errors versus which ones of these are intentional errors or intentional omissions. And so I can't speak directly to your question of what's more, clerical errors or actually intentional errors, because I try not to figure out why people do what they do, just evaluate what they do. So I don't know if that answers your question. It probably doesn't. But if we have numbers on what constitutes clerical errors, we can get those to you. I don't know that we do, but that doesn't mean that we don't, and we can certainly look into it if you would like that information.
Yes, actually, I would. I think that it's very important as an agency, if we're discussing fraud, that, we at least try to track where that comes from. Specifically when it involves getting, administrative hearings, criminal proceedings, or civil proceedings against an individual who is seeking benefits from the state. So I would imagine that information would be readily available. So I suppose what I'm asking for is I would like to see any data that the DCF or any other agencies of the state would have on deliberate fraud found from investigation versus unintentional fraud. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
It does. And we can certainly, yeah, I mean, I can't speak to other agencies, but for DCF, we can see what we have there. Absolutely.
Because I'm less, I'm not asking for you to guess on other people's intent.
Sure.
What I'd like to know is what the DCF actually has that would be able to provide us a little more background on where these reports are coming from and where the investigations lead.
Sure. It's a fair question.
Thank you.
Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this whole issue of whether it was fraudulent or not, I mean, I assume the definition of fraud is it was intentional. And so you as a fraud investigator are making a determination in each case whether it was intentional or not. Is that accurate?
I think yeah, I mean, it's an accurate statement. Unintentional fraud doesn't exist. Fraud as a legal construct requires intent.
So when you or your group investigate something, first of all, they're trying to determine, I take it, whether benefits were given that shouldn't have been given. And then you determine whether that was an intentional fraudulent or because it was a mistake. And so, and if you, I assume too, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if you determine it was unintentional, you still try to recoup what was taken. Depends on the circumstances, perhaps.
Yeah, as many of my law professors said, the answer to most of your questions is it depends. And so in that respect, it does. It depends specifically on the circumstances, how we would, because yes, I'll just leave it at that.
And in terms of the data that you have at your disposal, For instance, do you know how many investigations are undertaken and how many of those determine that it's intentional wrongdoing versus unintentional? Or is that just not data that you keep?
I mean, that's a good question. We certainly have circumstances where we investigate what we believe to be fraud, and it turns out to be something unintentional. And I would imagine that, while I can't guarantee that we have those figures, I think we probably would in some respect. And so we would be happy to, as with all the other requests, turn that over to all of you.
If it's available, I'd like.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just one or two more questions, and we'll move on to the Equifax. Representative Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is just another point of clarification. You had mentioned several times that it was your opinion that SNAP was had the highest level of incident. When you provide us with the statistical numbers, I just want to be certain that we have that breakdown as well, so that we'll know what we're looking at, and then we don't have to rely on your expert opinion.
Well, let me to the extent that I phrased it that way, let me rephrase it, since that's all, you know. It's not my opinion, it's just what happens to fall on my desk the most. So, but to answer your question, Representative, yeah, we'll have that breakdown.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
From a non-attorney's perspective, it's interesting listening to attorneys talk. So, thank you, Representative Carr.
And I'm by no means an expert. So.
Yes, the data that I've seen that'll probably be coming out here very quickly, just from the research department's answers to prior questions, we'll have those numbers specifically based on the program. Just a suggestion, looking at news articles from around the country on TANF or SNAP, food assistance fraud, I think there's several interesting examples. I think you described them as very elaborate. I forget the specific word you use, but very ingenuitive. People are very creative, and I think it may give a good example of why safeguards are needed. A little personal experience, not in fraud, but on the Commerce Committee the last 2 years, we were able to track a lot of data from unemployment, what was considered fraud. And when the Department of Labor, I think they shut down the system over a weekend and put in a 2-point ID verification system. That was my interpretation of what they did, just to kind of double check, make sure the person was who they were. We saw the numbers, and the data that I was tracking was the prior 40 weeks, the payout was $25 million per week. And the prior, I think, 8 weeks from that shutdown, the payouts were closer to, I think, 7 or 8. No, they were closer to about $30 million a week. And after they put in that very small 2-point verification, the data produced, it's on the Department of Labor's website, we saw the numbers go down to about $7 million a week, and then they dropped into the 6s and the 5s pretty shortly after. So just that 2-point verification, was it all fraud? I don't know, but we saw the numbers drop quite a bit, and so seems like those small fraud preventions may have an impact. And without them, we certainly saw our trust fund being depleted pretty rapidly. So anyway, just small little observation, and I think Dylan mentioned that at the beginning, one of our first meetings, just regards to the unemployment fraud, and just some reference to that, and there's some numbers to look back at. Anyway, thanks, Mark. May call on you for questions as we go.
Not a problem. I'll be here. Thank you.
You're very welcome, sir. So I guess now we'll turn to the Equifax. The gentleman from Equifax, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Auerkamp. Good afternoon, everybody. And thrilled to be here. My name is Bill Rowe, and I recently joined Equifax Workforce Solutions as Director of Government Relations for 9 states, including Kansas. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I'm joined by my colleague, Mark Delante. Mark is our Kansas account executive, and he's been with Equifax for a short 17 years. He's based in St. Louis. We represent 14,000 employees who are dedicated to the single proposition of helping people live their financial best. We are excited to share with you the work we do here in Kansas. When people hear the name Equifax, they commonly think about us providing credit reports for loans to lenders when someone is looking for a car loan, a mortgage, or a credit card. And while we do that, and we do it very, very well, we're much more than that. We lead the data industry in providing human resource data, analytic services, and verifications of employment and income for both the public and private sector. We manage unemployment claims, tax matters, and employment and income verification services for over 82% of the Fortune 500 companies. We also provide other outsourced human resource functions, such as I-9 compliance, W-2 and payroll processing, ACA management, and employment onboarding. Today, we'll outline the services Equifax Workforce Solutions provides government agencies and their administration of public assistance programs. These verification services assist in eligibility determinations, reduce improper payments, increase staff efficiency, and improve overall service. Current employment and income verification is critical in enrolling clients in benefit programs. But some state and federal agencies don't have the most up-to-date data. Using outdated wage data to set benefit levels leads to over and underpayments, and also allows for those agencies to be subject to fraud and abuse. I would like to emphasize that using real-time automated data benefits the consumer by accelerating the decision-making process, and it also helps to alleviate the need for the collection of excessive paperwork. Again, I appreciate the opportunity of speaking with you today, and Mark will outline the work that we are currently doing in Kansas and the new services we have developed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the committee for having me and hearing me out. As Bill mentioned, Mark Delante, I've been with Equifax for 17 plus years, and I'm going to go over a little bit more about sort of kind of looking forward to what we're doing currently with the department and sort of what we've got in store for state agencies in general. So Equifax Workforce Solutions is very proud for an almost decade-long partnership with the state of Kansas. We currently provide services under Equifax Workforce Solutions, and it's pronounced TALKS, by the way, T-A-L-X, TALKS. I don't know how they came up with it, but we'll just go with TALKS. We currently provide KDHE and DCF with the Work Number. It's an employment income database, and we provide the employment income data for SNAP, TANF, Medicaid, as well as establishing child support orders. Kansas and those departments leveraged the Work Number last year for 835,000 employment and income verifications in real time. They used it through a web portal, and they used it directly through an API integration into the KEYS system, which is Kansas Eligibility Enforcement System. I'll do a real quick brief overview of the Work Number. It's the nation's largest database of up-to-date employment and income records, representing more than 70% of the U.S. non-farm workforce. It's updated directly from the employers every time they run payroll. As a result, the Work Number as a database provides a greater level of reliability and timeliness than any other data source. It contains 150 million active employment records. We get that data from 2.5 million contributing employers across the U.S. And it provides real-time eligibility data that no other source can provide. So in addition to the Work Number, we're continuing to invest in expanding our capabilities to better help state and federal agencies. And so we've been broadening our solution to add incarceration insights and contact complete. So these new data sources offer access to additional information to further help benefit eligibility determination, redetermination, and overall program integrity or fraud. I'll provide a brief overview of these data sources in a moment, but please know that combining the work number with Contact Complete and with incarceration intelligence delivers better tailored benefits to those in need. It improves administrative efficiencies for agencies and caseworkers, reduces beneficiary time, effort, and confusion, reduces the number of applications denied due to insufficient documentation, enables agencies to deliver benefits more quickly, more accurately, and it provides a level of enhanced caseworker support where they're not having to provide and look up manual verifications, manual information. So Contact Complete is a data source that provides agencies with the most recent contact information. So just think address, phone and email address, as well as indicators around death and marital status. So Contact Complete covers 95% of the U.S. population. It has access to 295 million unique individuals. And why that's important, that information allows agencies to accurately locate their evolving beneficiary population and determine if beneficiaries should be removed from benefits based on a change in address or a death status, for example. Without automated access to this Contact Complete, an agency is relying on beneficiary self-reporting a change in address or self-reporting, their current situation, or they're going to rely on, the state relies on aged federal or state data that can basically be old and significantly impact benefit eligibility determination, program integrity, as well as distribution of the state's benefit dollars. On the other flip side, there's Contact Complete, then we've got incarceration intelligence. I will say that the state is currently leveraging incarceration intelligence through a company we procured. I just want to make sure that everybody's clear here. They are using it, but there is the ability to bring that under one contract through Equifax. So incarceration intelligence is the largest nationwide incarceration data network. It covers 85% of all incarcerations in the U.S., interfaces with 2,800 jails and correctional facilities, to source current incarceration status. And furthermore, incarceration intelligence represents more than 160 million historical booking records. Why is that important? If someone's incarcerated, you can suspend them from Medicaid benefits. And if someone is released and no longer incarcerated, you can resume, put them back on Medicaid benefits, and so that they've got that safety net as once they've been released. All these data sets provide important information to agencies, even in the state of normal business. When access to this data helps these agencies conduct effective eligibility determinations, improve continuity of care, and reduce churn to maximize caseworkers' efficiencies and expedite the benefit delivery process. This data further assists agencies in a state of non-normal operations when agencies experience resource constraints, as we have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic and will again experience in the near future when the public health emergency comes to a close. As the committee is well aware, in April 2023, the recent change in federal law now allows states to begin redetermining Medicaid enrollees' eligibility, a process that in the Medicaid circles is called unwinding. Because of the public health emergency, states have not been able to disenroll otherwise ineligible individuals or require states to perform Medicaid determinations, eligibility determinations. Specifically here in Kansas, as of the fall of 2022, there are about 500,000 people on Medicaid, which is a 30% increase from the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. As the PHE ends, Kansas faces the requirement to redetermine eligibility for that entire Medicaid population, including what is essentially a backlog of redeterminations for those enrolled during the COVID-19 pandemic. Leveraging automated data sources, as we just discussed, is critical in helping agencies such as KDHE and DCF quickly work back to a normalized caseload while not disturbing or delaying any eligibility decisions for new applicants. I'd also like to briefly talk about our partner ecosystem. We can also provide financial asset data property data, education data, tax information, as well as adult household composition, all of those to assist calculate an applicant's collective assets, determine various other benefit program eligibility, and comply with policy-specific requirements. As states' needs and priorities have changed, especially in light of the pandemic, Equifax has also evolved. I previously just introduced some of the additional data sets that are available to you, but we've evolved the model in which we consume, which states can consume our data sources. And so let me elaborate a little further on that. So historically, states have leveraged like a single data source, like the work number, at application or at renewal, or for fraud review. And so Kansas would request a record from us, and we would just return that employment information back to them. We actually have a contract, and it's priced by, just so everybody knows, it's priced by a number of transactions per year. They actually get 600,000 transactions annually under the current contract. But that's in a request response model. They can do that. The state can currently do that via web, batch, or an API integration. But the next evolution that we're seeing in other states, specifically our neighbors in Missouri, my home state, they're looking to move to a different model. And that's where Equifax is able to monitor and return alerts for designated life changes. So any life change that could impact eligibility, and it basically offers a more holistic picture of that applicant or beneficiary. Equifax provides these alerts on important life changes tailored to the agency's own specific policies and thresholds. So the agency may themselves determine if a further verification is needed beyond these data sources for eligibility or renewal purposes, and avoid churn, which is turnover where people are removed from benefits and then have to call back in and reapply, which is it's a drain on time and resources when people have to reapply after being already proved eligible previously. And so the recommended delivery for this monitoring tool and how Missouri is going to be doing it is through API integration. The state could still, through our services, have the ability to do web-based API integration or batch. And so I will touch a little bit, although this is a little ad lib, but Missouri is currently moving towards that model. They're going to go live in February with what we're calling Instant Client Insights. It's a case monitor, where they're actually doing monitoring instead of a request and response model. So they'll be indicated on life changes. They'll be told based on policy and thresholds. If there's an income amount of over a certain percent, then we would notify them that. If someone is deceased, we'll notify them of that. Now, we do that within, we don't want to overwhelm the agency with too much data. So we do it by policy, by program, and actually at thresholds that the department wants and at the times that they want. So, but that, I mean, in general, that's what I've got. Thank you for allowing us to share our perspective today. We regard our relationship with KDHE as as critical partners, and we recognize all the challenges that they've been through with the pandemic. So with this committee and the legislator's support, we look forward to playing a continued role in helping Kansas receive the benefits, their benefits in a timely, efficient, and accurate manner. Thank you again, and I welcome any questions.
Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. So I just wanted to understand how this process works. So there's an applicant and the agency sends the information to you and you put it through your processes and determine yes or no, applicant qualifies or applicant doesn't qualify, or not.
Actually, we are not in the business of determining eligibility.
Okay.
We simply provide data. And so currently we're just providing employment and income data. And so a caseworker requests, basically they submit an SSN to our system. We say we do not have anyone on that. We've got about 65 to 70% of the U.S. working population. If we don't have anything, we don't return anything. But when we do, we return an employment and income verification back to them, showing what employment that person has. At that point, then, the department does with that data what they do based on policy.
And do you know, and you may not, but let's say that your data is inaccurate and the applicant, they decline the application because of your inaccurate data. Do you know how the appeal process or how that gets sorted out?
There is an appeal process through a process where the applicant can call into Equifax to get that data resolved, cleaned up on our database through their employee or their previous employer. But this is a resource that streamlines things and makes things more quick and efficient for the applicant. And the applicant can always, from a manual perspective, bring in, check stubs to say, the work number's saying this, and then the caseworker could use the check stubs.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Representative Meyer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just kind of to follow along those lines, I had the same kind of questions. The amount of information you can collect on individuals is mind-blowing, honestly. So I kind of, I know you explained to us a little bit about where this information comes from, but one of my questions is, how are employers invited to take part in this program? Is the first part of my question.
So employers historically, so Walmart 20 years ago had a $2 million a month call center handling this. And so it was just made good business sense for them to outsource this. And quite frankly, call centers calling into someone and doing a verification verbally, you don't always get accurate information. So it took the market by storm a little bit, and employers were like, wait, I can outsource this. I don't have any risk of it comes directly from our database or our payroll system. I don't have any risk of a manager saying something or causing any problems. So they came on board very quickly, and we've grown to the largest. And so it is a business process optimization decision from the employer side to not have to keep this burden and allow the work number to handle it on their behalf via an electronic database or an API integration.
So kind of following that line of questioning, what types of employers typically take advantage of this? Are they employers that use large payroll processing houses, or are they employers that have their own HR department that processes payroll? Are you seeing larger corporations basically using this, like McDonald's, Walmart, Dollar Tree, things of that nature?
So originally, a lot of the service industry and retail industry that had the most turnover were primarily outsourcing to us. Over time, large corporations, like I said, from a business optimization perspective, have also adopted the service. But we've also grown the database considerably, and to the point of that contract increasing in dollar amount, I think the question was brought up earlier, we've grown the database considerably so that we know that there's going to be more hits on the database. And so it has actually spread all the way down to small companies that are outsourced to various payroll providers that have come on board. And that's how, in addition to just an organic growth with companies coming on board, we've also reached out to payroll providers and had partnerships with them.
That was kind of getting to the root of my question is, do you have a large list of payroll providers that you use to collect this data? Or is it a fairly small list? What does that look like? Is that something we could look at?
I don't know. I can get back to you on that. I know that I'll have to talk with some attorneys, I think, just depending on what our contracts are with them. But I certainly can get back with you on what constructs, from a payroll provider perspective, and what we can at least say about that.
Okay. And then final question for now. How often do you all check for errors in your reporting? And what percentage would you say, if you could, result in error?
I don't know the answer to that. I can get back with you on that. We're generally notified of an error when an employee brings it up about their report, and we have a process by which, we're governed by the Fair Credit Reporting Act, so we've got a process where they can resolve that issue. One of the things that we've stood for the whole time is we don't touch the data. I mean, it comes from the employer. We don't model it. We don't alter it. So it comes over from the employer, and so we do have a little bit of a stance of the fact that that's coming direct from the employer. The resolution has to come from that file feed that comes from the employer themselves. But from an accuracy perspective, I don't know the numbers, but I can try to ask about that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Representative Carr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this question may not, Mr. Rowe may not be the correct place to direct this question, but it's based on something that he said. This may speak more directly to the DCF with respect to the appellant process. In the event, as Representative Meyer mentioned, that there's something that has been placed in error. Certainly, it has not been historically factual to say that agencies such as Equifax are the easiest place in which to have information removed. Therefore, my question would then be with relationship to the appellant process, and you made it sound as if they simply provide information. However, factually, that's probably not. It probably doesn't work that easily. My question is, how long is that appellant process, does it usually take with respect to the DCF side of it?
I can't speak for individual state agencies, but I can speak for the process, at least under FCRA, that someone can dispute information either on their credit report, but this is not a credit report, this is an employment income report, and they follow the guidelines of FCRA, and we follow the federal law around that relative to EDRs, which is a employment data resolution ticket that gets opened. But beyond that, that's a little bit out of my purview, but I certainly would be happy to follow. I don't know, like, from start to finish, the time frames. I don't have that.
Sorry. Yes, please.
That's all right. I always think I'm loud enough. In terms of the appellate process from DCS perspective, basically how this works is you'll receive a notice that the appellate process with us starts at the time we terminate the benefits. So they get a notice of that. They can appeal that as part of the administrative hearing process. And so then they submit that to the they submit the appeal, and the appeal can be anything. They could just send an email, and they can send it to us, or they can send it to administrative hearing. Typically, they send it to us, and then we send it to the administrative hearing people, and then the appeals process begins. And when I say begins, what happens is an administrative law judge is appointed, and then that administrative law judge sets up a pretrial hearing where the parties appear telephonically, and they set up, if the appellant could have an attorney, maybe not have an attorney, might want time to get an attorney. So at that point, the timeline is a little bit fungible based upon what needs to happen before the hearing. But I can tell you that it's a lot faster to get through the administrative hearing process than it is to get anything moving in the court system. So I think the question you were asking is, how do you fix a mistake? Hopefully that gets done before it ever gets to the administrative hearing process. Hopefully they can communicate that with Equifax, get it fixed there, communicate that to our investigators, and we can look at that and say, okay, this was a mistake, and move on. So there's a lot of different factual scenarios in there that kind of dictate, I think, an answer to your question. But the formal appeal process through OAH, I mean, that can take months, as you would expect. And so the preference is to resolve those issues before it gets to that point.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thanks for coming. It seems like there was a lot you talked about that's not in the written testimony, unless I don't have all of it. I mean, I don't know. You didn't go off the written testimony, did you? Exactly.
We did two different ones, yes.
Okay. Yes. And are you willing to share your second one with us, or?
No, the written testimony is in front of you, right? No.
Sorry, Mark, I'll interrupt real quick here. Representative Humphreys, I did read through their presentation prior to the meeting, and I did talk with a gentleman from Equifax before the meeting. I said, well, you may want to go into a little bit more detail on some of the nuts and bolts, how it works, how the program interacts with the different agencies, and kind of get a little bit more boots in the ground information. So I did ask Mark to elaborate more. So he more did that because
Following
of
order.
requests.
The chair. Yeah, okay. Okay, so that's helpful. But then, because I mean, I'm kind of a take notes and underline and just, a renewable resources paper, by the way, so. um, the thing that I want to ask you a little bit about is, you get the work number, but then you also mentioned contact complete and incarceration intel. And so my question is, are you getting that data and information for everybody that, I guess, well, for everybody? And then, but you're only then using that information in this context, you're just using it for however DCF or KDHE wants it. But you actually have all of that for,
So the work number has, what is it, 150 million active employment records on its database to be leveraged by state and federal agencies if they've got the ability to actually, under FCRA, query that data. And then incarceration data comes from those 2,800 jails and correctional institutions and is then queried if the applicant or the agency has the right to see that data, they can query that. And then the address in death and marital status information and contact complete is a combination of multiple data sets that are kind of behind the scenes at Equifax.
they're just really collecting on everybody.
The credit bureaus have quite a bit of information, yes.
Because you also mentioned what they're doing in Missouri. I think you mentioned tax information, and you mentioned a couple other things.
Property.
Property.
Yep. Real and personal tax information. We can do household composition as well. Household composition helps caseworkers understand who all's eating in the home for SNAP, for example.
Yep. And so, okay, you've got this massive amount of information, but let's just say DCF, and they told us the amount of money that they're paying you in their contract. Is that, you're really just giving them the information, then they're deciding if there's fraud or not. You're not per se finding the fraud, if I understand correctly. Okay, you're just giving them the information. And then is that fee that they're paying you dependent upon how many people are in our program and what they're asking for and all of that?
Currently, it is based on the amount of transactions that are returned back. So a verification of employment and income that's returned back to KDHE or DCF is counted as a transaction, and they're billed at that level. Now, there's a commitment to an annual ceiling under the current contract. We are moving towards different models that would be a submission-based approach where you'd get access to all of the data sets that I've just referred to, and you just pay on a submission. And if we've got employment information, we'll send it back. If we found out that someone has moved, we'll send that back. If someone's incarcerated, we'll send that back.
And then it seemed like you said, if someone is deceased, that you pass that information on to them. Are they asking for that, or you pass that down for, that's kind of your?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, if we go into a model where we're doing continuous monitoring, we'd be monitoring, and we would ask the department at the different programs, what's of most importance to you? Do you want to know immediately if someone has moved out of state or died? And maybe the least priority, or I'm going to ask you for these on a monthly basis. I'm trying to think of something less important. Someone moved from county to county, moved internally, let's say, in Kansas, or household composition or change. I'm trying to think of an example. You can prioritize what you want back and what the department wants based on their ability to, first of all, handle that, but also prioritize it in that I can remove someone from benefits more quickly, or leverage it to get someone on benefits more quickly.
Okay, that's helpful. And then, so you have this massive amount of data, and then I'm assuming that, when someone files for eligibility for SNAP or TANF or something, they're sort of giving their permission for their information to be shared. But just maybe other people who haven't filed for those things, I'm assuming that information is confidential on your end?
It's governed by FCRA, and the only people that can have access to it, so in the private sector, You'd have to apply for a mortgage, you'd apply for an auto loan, and you'd sign a document saying you can check these various data sources. FCRA allows state agencies to have access to this data just by a person applying, because they are trying to determine if that person is eligible for the benefit. The SNAP, TANF, and Medicaid and child support agencies have access, or have permissible purpose to query these data sets.
Okay, that's super helpful. Okay, then just my last little set of questioning. You mentioned that when we come to the end of the emergency pandemic, that that of course there's all these things, and so you have to disenroll people and determine eligibility again. But is that you doing that? I mean, you mentioned it, so then I was trying to understand, because you mentioned it, who's actually doing that?
No, so it's not Equifax. Again, it's necessary. This is a national thing, and as states are in varying states of where they are from a unwinding perspective from the public health emergency. But when it was public health emergency was in effect, you did not have to do redeterminations, and you had waivers to bring people on. Yeah. And so I don't want to speak for KDHE or DCF, but some states are leveraging us to work through that backlog with these additional data sets. We provide the data that they would like to see as it's relevant to making sure that they can work through caseloads or find out, like I said, most top of mind is if someone has died during the pandemic and they're still getting benefits, or someone has moved. I mean, that's if you can we can cut through a lot of the, these people should no longer be getting benefits. So, but we don't make the decision. We just provide the data.
That makes sense. And then the last thing, I mean, I kind of hate to bring this up, but it's kind of, I have to, is a data breach. And I know, like, I just want to be reassured of what you're doing in those, because we have heard of things with the big three. So.
Yeah, I understood. It was a while ago. We've spent more money than I don't have all the facts. We've spent in the hundreds of millions of dollars to shore up things on this end. It was an incident that did happen. It's something that kind of put us up into the next level as it relates to from a security and IT perspective. And it was the largest investment Equifax has made into internal systems ever in their history. So, but yes, it was a breach that we did have. So. But I think it was in 2017, if not further back. But so.
I appreciate that,
Yeah.
and I just need a reassurance of you're working, that you feel like you've done what you can. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Mr.
Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to know a little bit more about what Missouri is doing to understand that, and then I have a follow-up.
Okay. So Missouri is basically taking their eligibility system, which they're outsourcing to another company. But I mean, if I could speak in terms of Kansas, if it's all right. I mean, Kansas eligibility enforcement system, KEYS, is built, and it's a system that caseworkers can actually work in and work through the process of initial eligibility determination all the way through, closing out that case, approving it and/or closing it out. And so Missouri is actually going to leverage multiple data sets. So they're going to leverage the work number, they're going to incarceration, as well as that contact complete, so address information, essentially contact information, and marital status and death. They're going to actually pull that into their system, and they're actually going to have us house that. We're going to monitor it for them, and depending on what a caseworker needs to do inside of their eligibility determination system, they're going to plug in, this person needs SNAP and TANF, and based on rules and on the back end through the API integration, we would then send whatever information they've deemed from a trigger or indicator perspective. This person's not working, they are working. This person's incarcerated, they're not incarcerated. It just varies by program. But instead of the caseworker having to think through necessarily, I got to check this, then I have to check this, I have to check this, it's done automatically on the back end through the eligibility system, and then pinging various data sets of Equifax's or others, or even state data sources through MOUs with different departments. Bringing that all into one central location right in front of the caseworker to just ease the process of onboarding people onto the benefits, as well as making sure that the caseworker's notified that this person has financial assets of X amount, or has a job that wasn't disclosed, or is incarcerated.
Okay, so Joe Smith, under the Kansas system, you just send them information when he dies. You do that now.
Well, no, I don't know. I can't speak for DCF and KDHE. They do not currently acquire death information from us, from Equifax. But they do employment income, so maybe I can help with that.
And so Missouri's just broadening the data that you're sending them without requests? In other words,
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to figure out what the difference is between the Kansas and Missouri systems.
I apologize. I was speaking to the Kansas system when I said that we do not provide death information. So the difference is it's more of a continuous monitoring model instead of a request and response. We can do request and response initiated transactions, but we can also, as a person applies for benefits, just pre-package what the state wants: current address, death indicator, marital status, employment income, how much they're making or not making, and then incarceration status. So you check all that right up front, and just say, you can actually then prioritize. So you can either say green light, there's no flags, move through the process, or this one looks like it might need review by a caseworker, or this one, again, based on the flags, when it comes through their eligibility system, keys would apply flags to it, or in Missouri's case, their product called Current would apply flags to it to say, no, that the person is not eligible. But it's based on the data that flows through the eligibility system housed at the state.
I'm still confused. What I think I'm hearing, but I'm not sure, is that in Kansas, you check eligibility initially, but beyond that, you are only responding to requests for information from the caseworkers. Is that accurate? No.
We only respond to requests in Kansas from the caseworker. Depends on when, though. Add application, renewal, recert, or if there's a QC or fraud check.
Right. So just in the death case, you don't give that to the Kansas agencies automatically?
No.
They have to ask about it?
We don't even have a contract for death. We only have a contract for employment income in Kansas. Yes.
In Missouri, they want you to send that to them immediately when you get it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so for this information, so it is a request, right? At first I thought you said it was continuously updated. And it is continuously updated, and then the individual caseworker can then request a further update. Is that right? Yes. Am I following correctly?
On a request response model like the state of Kansas set up right now, just for the work number, it is enter an SSN, we return data. In a continuous monitoring model, there's variations of it, and on how, do you just want multiple data sets on a request and response, or do you want us to actually proactively, continuously monitor a population? In that model, there is an initial activation file, which is basically the state saying, we would like you to monitor this caseload, and then there are ongoing adds and deletes to that. And then, by policy, we would send whatever indicators that we've talked about that are of priority to the agency.
Okay. So following that, if an individual were to apply at any point in their lifetime since this program has been enacted, would they permanently be part of that continuous update? Or would they be taken off of that update when they are removed from the caseworker's caseload?
So I will answer it in this way, that there is an add and delete file, But then we do get into contractual obligations about how long we have to store data, and that's where the lawyers do get involved. But at the let's say the cessation or the end of the contract, there is a mutually agreed upon security terms and legal contract language around destruction of data.
So I guess I'm kind of asking if once a person's case is closed with the DCF, if they are no longer, if their file is no longer being updated and that information is no longer being provided to the DCF, even without the caseworker's knowledge, so it's not necessarily on their caseload. They aren't seeing that data come in because their file has been closed, but is that data still being updated in real time because they've already been input into the system?
We would not do anything without the request, even in the continuous monitoring model, on a person is no longer on benefits in Kansas, if that answers your question.
No, that does answer. And then
Okay.
follow-up question, if an individual wanted to request the data that Equifax had on file through this specific program, is that something that they can do? And if so, how would they request that?
There is the ability for the applicant to see their data via a report. I will have to get back with you. I believe they can do that one time a year. It may be more than that. I don't know for sure. But there is a conduit and a path through FCRA for them to see that data and to review it, yes.
With, and that's good to know. I'm glad that they can access that information. Are clients typically informed of the fact that the DCF is using this program in order to find their data? And either way, are they made aware of the fact that the data kept on file through this program is available to them once a year?
I don't know that we proactively make them aware. I do know that we, to your question earlier about how long we store things, one of the reasons we store data around us providing information to KDHE or DCF is so that a consumer can go find out who queried their data. So I will say that I don't know what happens in the course of disclosure by the caseworker to the applicant, but federal law allows for the Child Support Agency, SNAP, TANF, Medicaid to query Equifax data. I just don't know how often it's told from a caseworker at the state level to the applicant that is happening, or if there's actually, I don't know if some states have more forms that it actually spells that out or not. I think I might have got a little sidetracked there, but they do have the access to be able to see who has queried them. And when I got into some of the gray area about contractual stuff, we have some requirements from our perspective about how long we have to save data. And it kind of came around to your first question a little bit. So did that answer your question? Sorry.
Probably as best as you can. I get a little in the weeds about this stuff, but mostly I was asking because as someone who's done these applications for some time, and you said this program has been in existence and you've been working with the DCF since 2015, correct?
17 per the contract, but I feel like
okay, 2017. I was actually not even aware that Kansas was using this program, so I was unable to inform my clients, which I did not work for the DCF, but granted, I was a caseworker in another arena who frequently helped my clients apply for these benefits and was unaware of the fact that Equifax had this data and was using this to check their eligibility, so I wasn't able to inform my clients. So that's kind of where that question was coming from, just from a consumer protection perspective.
I know that KDHE has an integrated environment. Basically, they have an API directly through keys to us. And historically, I've known DCF, at least the SNAP program, has a web-based, the web portal where they log into the worknumber.com and pull that data. I can't speak for how far they rolled that out and what level of caseworker had access to that data. I don't know that.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. And it is 2015. I misspoke a minute on the record. We started the relationship in 2015, at least in the most recent contract.
Representative Pickard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what would be the comparison contractual cost if you do the continuous monitoring system versus what Kansas does now?
I would love to give you an answer, but I will have to wait on that. And I'll say this, that it is an increased cost. We believe there's value there because you're not having to look. But we have not gotten into the weeds with DCF and KDHE about where there are gaps, if there are gaps. I mean, they're using our incarceration right now. It's under a different contract. We've got the work number contract. There is quite a bit of spend relative to bringing on a full, from activation all the way to renewals and recertifications to monitor that, that whole portfolio, if you will. With that said, though, I can't say a number right now, but I'd be happy to work something up and get it to the right folks.
It sounds like it'd be more efficient rather than ask, receive, ask, receive.
Well, we agree, and we've got some ROI as well that I think I'd like to try to put aside the spend, right next to it and show that the value outweighs the line item budget expenditure.
Great information.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's what you call a softball pitch there, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you later.
We agree.
On the live data, continuous contract, whatever it's called, out of the states you work with, I don't know how many you work with, but do a majority of them get the live data, or?
It's a fairly new product for us. We bought APRIS 2 years ago, and so we've started to bundle these solutions. We have 40-plus states that leverage the work number, and we're currently working with a handful of states. It is small. Missouri will be our initial state to roll out a continuous monitoring model. So just very transparent there that this is a new product for us. I mean, hence why we wanted to come speak, that I think people have known us for years as just the employment and income verification folks, if they knew us other than the credit bureau. And so we wanted to come speak to the fact that we've got these new services. But we've got a few other that are in discussions, but our first state live on this monitoring will be Missouri in Q1 of this year, essentially.
Representative Roth?
Well, I get emails from Equifax wanting me to check my credit score. So is that part of that one time a year?
You have the ability to check your credit score, yes, and conversely, on the work number side with the employment income side, yes, you can go in and get a report and it'll show you what the work number is displaying for your employment.
So the email's legit that comes from Equifax warning you it's not a phishing scam?
I don't know the specific email you're referring to, but there are
something from Equifax says you can check your credit score here, click on this link.
I am not an IT security guy. I just would want. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Chairman.
My IT guy would say, don't click it. Okay.
Don't click it.
Any further questions, committee? Very good. Mark, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Take all the questions.
Appreciate it.
Same with Mark from DCF. Appreciate your time. Thanks for being here. And Bill, I guess that's going to wrap up the meeting for the day. We're back on Thursday. It's going to be a maybe more loose discussion on Thursday. We have the main topic is child support cooperation, and kind of give you the big picture. We've had a few bills come to this committee, one introduced here, one came out of approps, regarding child support cooperation. And as I understand it, the bills take that concept two different directions. We've had some discussion with DCF at a few of our presentations about some of the federal guidelines on this topic, which there may be some issues there. So more just a broad conversation about it. Try to get to the bottom of it, because we will probably start working bills next week and take a look at both of those at some time, maybe next week. So anyway, if there's no further questions, that's it. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.